thank you for being here today. This is a really special event for so many people, not only here today as part of the audience, but around the world as well. It gives me my great pleasure to introduce my mate, scientist Dr. Robert Duncan. Would you please make him welcome? So we're just going to have a discussion today, back and forward, about a major topic that's affecting the world, and I'm just going to pass this over to Robert to initiate the whole discussion and give us a little bit of background on yourself, and
sure,
that'll be wonderful.
Okay. I'm not sure how much background you want, but I consider myself one of the last Renaissance scientists, last Renaissance man. And I've studied everything from Beethoven to Shakespeare. I went to a private school in Connecticut, and then on to Harvard on the East Coast, where I was early accepted. They allowed me to graduate in 3 years. I declined, not Harvard, but to graduate early, because there's so many great classes to still take, and my parents were paying for it. So. I worked at an artificial intelligence company. I forgot to mention, my undergrad focus was pre-medical and computer science. I decided I don't like blood of any kind. So unlike the rest of my family, I didn't become a medical doctor. I liked robots and technology and computers. So after that, I worked for an artificial intelligence company that did image recognition of all types. And I went back to school for a master's in biomechanical engineering, robotic engineering, like artificial hearts and those types of engineering majors. And then I went to school again, a different Ivy League, and got a business degree, a master's of business administration, and then did a stint in some other work, went back for more schooling, get a PhD in artificial intelligence, but a very specific field, which is genetic algorithm optimization of artificial neural networks. So what that means is we were creating alien synthetic minds, emerging minds. And when I say alien, it's not from another planet. We're just creating cybernetic minds. And there's a Dr. Wiener, and I think it was about 100 years ago when the CIA was created, that coined the term cybernetics, which means there is no distinction between a synthetic symbolic representation of intelligence or a biological one. In fact, they meet. You can have brain chips if you want, and it will all give rise to consciousness. And I just found that field fascinating. I did do a stint for doing management consulting for a Fortune 50 firm, and got to travel worldwide quite a bit. Anyway, when I got recruited, headhunted by DARPA, Department of Defense, CIA, and I love high-end technology, and I wasn't immoral about it. I wrote the code to track the artificial intelligence code to track the Soviet nuclear submarine fleet. That was a big project for the Navy. Worked on robotic surgery for medicine for the Army. Voice recognition, conversation planning for chatterbots. You use them all the time now. Voice of God weapons we used in war, in the Gulf War, for example.
This is the V2K.
V2K, where we can project a sound you cannot plug your ears for to stop. And we'll get into a little more about how that particular technology works. But we told them in their language, this is all a lay down your arms. And it worked quite effectively because the technology is unexplainable to the common person who hasn't experienced it yet. And then I saw in society a lot of my work being misused on my own population. I'm like, that's exactly what I worked on, the things Craig's experiencing. And this was not supposed to be used on civilians. This was supposed to be a wartime weapon used for interrogation purposes, perhaps, to maybe fatigue the enemy and demoralize them, which you can understand the Department of Defense would be quite interested in this. Wars without blood, I mean, that's wonderful. Being misused completely. I started my own investigation about 22 years ago. I became a human rights activist against torture, all forms of torture, but mainly this kind of torture that Craig will talk about, what's happened to him and people all around the world. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be, and so my agenda since then has been to enlighten people, to educate them. I've gone to the Senate Intelligence Committee, met with 23 senators in the United States, federal, with the head of the LA FBI, and to our dismay, our words fell on deaf ears of what was happening. No one understood the technology or even believed it existed. And these are our leaders. We met with the Senate Intelligence Committee behind closed doors and, frisked for wires and bugs. They had never heard of MK Ultra, which they're the oversight committee of our intelligence agencies. And we had a huge hearing in the 1970s called the Frank Church hearings, a senator from my state of Idaho, but I know most people don't know where Idaho is. And it was very famous, and turns out the CIA was doing all this mind control testing on humans in Canada and the United States, just some various things. And they end up shredding about 70,000 documents. So that kind of led me forward to write some books that I did and do events like this, just to educate the world. This is happening. It's probably ramping up. If you know someone, educate them, because the shock and awe of becoming a target, not knowing how it all works and what to expect, is horrifying. And I kind of promised Craig I wouldn't get into how evil it is. It is condensed evil. So that, anyway, that's my introduction.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Robert. So we've talked about a variety of things since Robert arrived on Wednesday. He looked really great when he came through customs and immigration. He stood there by himself, and we hadn't met before, but we've been on numerous conferences and radios and panels talking about this issue, because I'm one of the targeted individuals from this. I lived in the United States for 28 years. So when do you think this mind control started? Because there are discussions about post-World War II, what happened with the paperclip, was it Project Paperclip?
So after World War II, the Russians, the winners of the World War II, and the United States, along with Britain and others, decided to divide all the German scientists and forgive them of their war crimes. And what we hear about are the ones that end up building, in NASA, were building intercontinental ballistic missiles, or the missile scientists. But half of them were mind scientists, and they were about psychological warfare of how to socially engineer the world under one world control. We don't hear about those, but they're very much in the influence of every political party in the world.
Yeah, so I know there are numerous scientists who came over, instead of going to the Nuremberg trials and being hanged, the US government said, you tell us everything you know about mind control because you've been using children in the concentration camps. And the US received some of these scientists, and some went to Russia, and it's escalated from that period.
A new arms race began, and this is for the very soul of man, the cognitive warfare. It's funny, we think nuclear weapons, that's what we need to worry about. And that we do. I mean, absolutely, that would annihilate all civilization. But you're one step ahead if you can control the minds of those with their fingers on the nuclear weapons. And so that's the idea, as well as you can shape cultures, not just through your normal propaganda methods of television, radio, et cetera. This is direct neural interfacing wirelessly while you're sleeping, programming your dreams, making associations that are not your self-autonomous entity. And this is a conversation the human race has to have, every government has to have. And this is why I at least talk about it, is to get more people interested in it before it's too late. And it may be too late, but...
We know that the weapons were created for the Iraq War, as an example, to tell the Iraqi troops when they were retreating, you can basically talk into a microphone, and that can radiate out to a couple of miles, 2 or 3 miles, and they use that to tell the Iraqi forces that this is the voice of Allah, put your weapons down.
There are two technologies. The voice of God is a broad categorization of both audio techniques, and one's called LRAD, long-range acoustical device, which again can go for a long distance. No speaker can do that. It's a type of acoustical array. And then there's the microwave hearing effect. Dr. Frey first invented it, and there's a Dr. Lin in the University of Chicago that has also done work on it. And this is a strange effect that if microwaves are high-frequency radio waves and interact with the brain, it heats it slightly, and then it cools, heats it slightly. And this is done in the extremely low frequency range, and humans can hear voices clicking, music can be piped into it with different levels of sensitivity, and it depends on the power range window. And that's one type of voice of God weapon. The Army calls it V2K, voice to skull. They removed it from their website because of all the people that are complaining about it. And so that's one aspect. Then there's more sophisticated weaponry that we use brain prints. Everyone has a unique fingerprint. Even more so, you have a unique thought pattern. And so we can cognitively model certain aspects, like a fingerprint, of your brain print, if we can get a sample of your MEG, which is called magnetoencephalograph, or your EEG, electroencephalograph, reading your brain waves, the electricity and the magnetic radiance that it gives off. Now again, people have difficulty believing we've gone from brain chips, which they used to do in the 1960s with a guy named Dr. Delgado, and he's known as, he was a Yale professor in the School of Medicine for neurology, and he would experiment with humans by inserting electrodes into their brain. He could create any type of emotion. He could move their bodies in certain ways. Very brutal, but that was allowed during the Cold War. He even inserted brain chips to do it remotely, just radio frequency brain chips. His most famous experiment was using a bull, and I don't know if he actually was in the ring with the bull, and he was the matador, but with the press of the button, as the bull charged, would suddenly stop. And that really impressed, obviously, many people in government. How do you control humans? How can we use this for violent criminals, for example? And a whole plethora of opportunities arose, but the research remains dark because we, moral people, would not accept it. Now, in one experiment, when I was with DARPA, we were working on the Soldier 2000 project. I went with a bunch of guys with brass and flare, whatever you want to call it, lots of medals, high-ranking guys. We went into Mass General Hospital and asked for patients with no family, with dementia, and we needed to experiment on them. But anytime you give money away or get it from the government, you have to have dual uses. So we said they might walk away, not know where they are. We want to track them. Now that was the cover story. We were really looking at a full body land of all vital signs for soldiers in the future. Well, that was in 2000. Obviously, we've progressed quite a bit since then. And they gave it to us. Just human beings being trafficked.
There's been such an incredible history of what the United States has done in terms of experimentation.
And this is just what they were caught doing. There was a Dr. Ewan Cameron, head of the World Psychiatry Community, and he had CIA funding. He took housewives that had mild depression, played 2-track loop tapes, gave them drugs, LSD, I believe, and the 2-track tapes were very negative. Your family hates you, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get into the details. It's very awful and evil. And their personalities would be erased in a couple weeks. One woman sued. She got money. And she had to learn how to talk and pee again. So that's literally brainwashing. You're de-patterning the brain's cultural background, everything it's learned. Then the second half comes in, and that's programming. And then you build up new personalities. The CIA does this for split personality assassins, but it's for splitting personalities. It's also used in a variety of interrogation techniques for high-value targets. So yes, there's a long history of experimenting on the vulnerable people. Usually people can be discredited. We would feed Down syndrome children radioactive cereal, for example, to see how frequently cancers would arise. The list is numerous with syphilis. We can
syphilis.
go into.
How do you get these people to experiment on?
Non-consensual.
Well, one, it's non-consensual, but it's also.
Are they institutions? Are they?
No, it's the medical industry itself is such an authority that they can be paid under the table by usually the CIA, but in my case it was Department of Defense. And they just say national security, that's the buzzword.
In the case of radiation testing, during the Cold War, people would go into hospital just for basic surgery, put under anesthetic, come out with burns on their bodies. And that was part of the process of what was done to people non-consensually. You went in there for a basic surgery, and they came out with burns on their bodies, and there was an 18-month investigation into it. And there's a wonderful YouTube video where President Clinton stands up in 1995, October 1995, and he basically says, on behalf of the US government, we need to step up and apologise that this is what we've done to people. So when you look at the history, it's overwhelming. Plutonium injections, syphilis, LSD. They injected black women to make them barren. They decided if you were poor or homeless, they could inject you with something as a test subject. There are so many examples.
Britain did that because homosexuality was illegal to a World War II hero who cracked Hitler's...
The Enigma.
Yeah.
The Enigma.
Is there not a code of ethics that underpins this?
Well, if I can explain my situation. So I lived in the United States. I moved there in 1983. Knew nothing about this at all. I've been a victim, a targeted, what we call a targeted individual, for at least 30 years. So I believe that I am one of the victims who at some point after during an operation, have been chipped or implanted. I literally have voices coming into my head 20 hours a day. I average about 4 hours sleep at night time before I'm woken up with very, very clear voices. I can delineate between my own thoughts and, as Robert alluded to, exactly, the computerized nightmares and dreams that come into my head. I'm burnt from the top of my head to throughout my body from these transmissions. I can be on a plane or on a ship anywhere in the world. I've been up to the North Cape, down to Antarctica 4 times, and I'm blown off my feet when these people decide to attack me. So I can literally feel a click, as you were talking about, go from one side of my head to the other. The voices come in, my head starts to swell up, and it's just a technology that no one wants to know about at the moment. You talk to a medical practitioner and just say, I'm hearing voices. Well, they say, well, you know, you're schizophrenic. Schizophrenia, we'll come to questions in a minute. Schizophrenia happens to people in their 20s, and they have sometimes split personalities. They can't live a normal life. And it doesn't happen to people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So I go through a daily process now, as do hundreds of thousands of people. I'm a board member of an organisation called ICATOR, ICATOR, based in Belgium. It stands for the International Coalition Against Torture and Robotization of Living Beings. And we are fighting so hard to try and bring this as a war crime before Parliament in Brussels. We have so many people contacting us, post-World War II people who are going through torture every single day. There is not a moment that I'm walking down the street, because transmission can also happen through the eyes. I can be watching a program on TV, Jeopardy for example, I love Jeopardy, or I go on a ship and I play trivia. I can't play trivia because I'm given the answers. So Jeopardy questions to do with sports, which I don't follow unless it's Australian, Aussie rules or swimming. I don't follow American football, but I'm given the answers very, very clearly. I can, as I say, delineate between my own thoughts and those which are coming into my head. And part of this process is also that they take you, as you become so exhausted, they take your sentences and give you the words in advance of you actually producing the words that you want to. So part of my daily routine is I don't respond to the voices at all. They're virtually non-stop. I don't respond to them because I can literally have the image come in at the same time as the voice coming in.
And you can imagine how useful that would be to manipulate politicians or news broadcasters is inserting words in their speeches or screwing up their speech, depending on who you want to win and manipulate.
Or being in a meeting and transmitting what you are watching and listening to some.
And that's the spy application.
That's the spy application of it.
And you have no metal necessarily on you. But you're giving off biosignatures, which can be deciphered.
Correct.
And it's the ultimate weapon.
So I can literally feel the voices pulsating when they come into my head. I can literally feel that. So a doctor will refer you to a neurologist. You go in because this is not well known or it's being protected, this information. You have a neurologist and a radiologist who looks at the chart very quickly. They're not looking for specific implants or chips. Some of them are so small, they're not all made of metal, so MRIs and CAT scans, X-rays don't pick these up. And so you have what's called calcification, and that happens to, the bone grows over the skull, and I just spoke to a neurologist recently, and the neurologist said, yes, we don't go into those areas that we're not looking for a tumour. They're called LFOs, light foreign objects.
Yeah, the medical industry, unfortunately, is not in cahoots with the military applications, and that's for a reason. They have to take an oath, do no harm. But as we found out during the Gulf War or Desert Storm, we tortured a few people, as Clinton said. I think it was Clinton. We do things that the public can't know about because they would feel too much shame that their tax dollars were being used in such a way. They would lose their funding potentially. But there are other ways other than chipping. There are about 26 other ways, but I'm not going to get into them. And all are being explored. That's why they need so many humans to do this survey, if you will. And the one such example is nanoprotein, magnetic nanoproteins. Now, how they're delivered to the individual, there's a variety of mechanisms that can do that, but they permanently attach to the nerve cells and brain cells, and hence just a magnetic field that is biosynchronized, biocorrelated to your brain pan will only affect you, not the person next to you. So you have been turned into a cell phone, in a sense. That's one example. I don't want to get into all of them.
And we maybe you're hearing about the Havana syndrome in the United States, which is where some of these diplomats have been targeted. So maybe we can talk about, and I meant to say at the beginning, we're going to just discuss all this and we'll have about 20 minutes for questions afterwards. So sorry, I didn't mention that at the beginning. So yes.
Havana syndrome is something new, and it's kind of counterintelligence. It sounds conspiratorial. Why would the CIA attack their own people? At an embassy in China, even here in Sydney, there's an FBI agent who's recent in Florida suing the U.S. government. He knows about it, and he's trying to stop it. But the news, the general world news, they first said, oh, it must be crickets causing brain damage. Now, Havana syndrome, they have a very specific set. The doctors who are in charge of it have a very specific set of guidelines to call someone that they have Havana syndrome, and that's vestibular damage of the ear, mild traumatic brain damage, and other things. Now, we can do that with acoustic weapons, we can do it with microwave weapons, often called directed energy weapons, DOEs. You'll hear that acronym used. However, this is something different, and the U.S. government, their best agents they're denying their claims. And why would they lie? It makes no sense. Because your career is over as soon as you admit you have an illness of some sort, something going on with your brain. And so, I probably shouldn't say this on camera, but I think it's a false flag technique. Operation Northwoods, it was top secret and then got released, that we were going to attack American citizens and military bases within the U.S. And blame it on Cuba as a reason to invade them. And that's called Havana Syndrome. It's like, are they playing the same game again? Trying to blame it on Russia or whoever behind it. So I'm very skeptical about it. And Havana Syndrome is just a small subset of this much broader picture of hundreds of experiments going on the minimum I can estimate by those who speak English, connected on the internet, that are even aware, 10,000 in the United States. Clearly, this is much larger than that, and it has to be scaled worldwide.
So we were talking about it earlier on through iCouture. We've established that there's at least around the world 1 million people who have been either implanted or their brains have been mapped, and they're going through this absolute torture. We know that in China alone, there are 400,000 people who have what I have, the V2K, who are hearing very clear voices and have gone before the Beijing court and demonstrated and said, this is what's going on, this is what you're doing to your own citizens. We just absolutely overwhelmed it at iCouture from people contacting us, and Robert also, through the work that we do on the media, I can't keep up with the number of people who are contacting us, and I think that you're hearing similar stories about the effects of this, of sleeping and patterns and the torture.
So I should say how I do my research, and I'm very picky on who I identify as what's called a targeted individual, TI. I have to make sure they're hearing voices. I need to know what the voices are saying, because the CIA uses scripts and they have names, but they're basically to cause confusion, panic, fear. That's the basis of depatterning a person before you reprogram them.
And so the effects of this, though, you're hearing similar stories about people going through what I go
that's
through.
Right. So those are the classifications.
Yeah.
And if they follow the scripts, then I'll include them in my data.
Yep.
But I'm very good about privacy. I will not put someone's name to their interview. I've interviewed about 2,500 people in order to get a good sample of everything that's going on and find the commonalities. And I quit interviewing because it's so obvious.
And we're estimating that 60% of the victims are women and 40% are men. And you've got an interesting...
Well, yeah, I'm not disagreeing. Yeah. Those are the ones that have come forward. Typically, when you're creating a programmed assassin or a spy or a psychobomb, we have a lot of shootings in the U.S. and many of them hear voices. And that's a social engineering technique, possibly, to take away gun rights. But you can make a person believe they hear a specific voice, and that's voice morphing, something I worked on. And you only need a small sample of anyone on a telephone. The NSA collects it all, so all your voices have samples. And they can throw your family, dead relatives' voices if they already have a sample from the past that's been collected. It reminds me of Nancy Reagan, who was channeling some dead relatives. That can all be another form of manipulation of leaders. And so this is it's a very devastating technology in terms of democracy, religion, There's no free will. Well, then how does that survive? And even crime and punishment. If you don't know whose mind is actually manipulating that person into violence or criminal activity, there is no justice because you're linking a body, not the person's autonomy and free will. So
It's interesting, there was a chap by the name of Ewan Cameron, and some of the people who are very close to me recognise the connection that I have with James Cameron.
right.
So, not that they're related at all, but I used to live with James Cameron, the scientist director of Avatar and Terminator. And we, during the time that I was living with him for about 4 months in Malibu, we went up to promote Avatar in Seattle, Washington, and we did a side trip to a company called iLabs. And iLabs looks at there's a lot of brain research there, and we saw the transmission of thoughts from a child onto a screen. So the child literally was given the names of animals, and the child would project it up onto a screen. So there's some really positive parts to this. Not that I enjoyed watching a child being used for this demonstration, but there's some really positive parts to this, where you have people who have Parkinson's now can literally look at a screen. They have very, very thin wires which are put into their brain, and they can literally type through their thoughts an email and have it sent to somebody. So I'm one of the, unfortunately, the guinea pigs who I will not stop.
Yeah, and you're the warfare users.
I'm the warfare. I'm the warfare.
I like that the civilian scientists are catching up, and a lot of people don't like Elon Musk, like his Neuralink company, but I think that's a necessity to bring awareness, and it's not going to be regulated until the civilians catch up and say, look at what we can do. We can connect monkey brains to human brains. Now, Duke University, what they're experimenting with is what my future book, or book I'm currently working on, is called Emergent Minds, and Topologies of Brain Networks. What that means is you can connect, three people's brains together. They do monkeys at Duke University, and they become hyper intelligent. Not just like three people talking, they become one mind, a super intelligence, and they can solve problems, mazes and other things that a single monkey can't do. Now that's quite interesting. Imagine warfare strategy or solving the world's problems. That might be useful. Who's going to volunteer is the problem. You're utilizing other people's brain capacities. And so I'm writing about that only from a theoretical standpoint and to enlighten people of where this technology is headed. Will we one day give away our cell phones and have a brain chip and we all communicate telepathically? This is very possibly the future. And people are going to say, no, I would never do that. I bet people will line up if it's the only way they can compete at work, insert a new language, or increase their intelligence, or, people say they'll never get implants. Well, you lose your wallet or your medical records. It's all implanted. People are going to do it.
And it's in a variety of languages. So we have a very good friend in the United States who lives just outside Chicago, who's also on panels talking about this, Dr. Len Baer. And he's been diagnosed with this, and the voices which come into his head are all in Russian.
In Russian, and they use his family members' voices for the derogatory remarks.
And he's been recognised by the US government as having this,
Yeah.
which is so fantastic. I wanted to talk about the acronyms that we talked about earlier. One is TAMI, one is MIND, and one is Satan.
Okay, and these are all subsystems and evolutions of mind-controlled technologies, but I'm going to start back even further. There's one called REHIC, and it stands for Remote hypnotic inter or intra-cerebral control. And what that means is at a distance, and this is an old CIA technology, at a distance we can control thoughts, behaviors, moods, and the cerebral part obviously uses the highest level form of our identity, our ego, our processing power that integrates all the other parts of our brain. And then, that I think that says it all, but then some of these other acronyms or systems that we developed, MIND is magnetically integrated neuron duplicator. So we can actually duplicate virtual neurons into a person, as well as clone that personality into a supercomputer. I mean, it gets really scientific or science fiction-y, but it's not. And it's not 100% fidelity by any means. We're a long ways from that. But a lot of the rich people are investing in this technology because they don't want to die. They got a lot of money. They don't want to die. So it's kind of silicon immortality is what they're going for. They won't achieve it because it's impossible to get 100% accuracy of a human mind.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like we have our individual souls, and I get through my daily torture, not only through my family and the friends who have helped research this information and by the work that I do, and it's absolute torture. But I reach out and I help as many people as I can, and I am paid back in that way. It's stopped me from doing a lot of the work that I want to do now that I'm retired. I just want to talk about the mindset, just briefly, because I don't want to recognise the perpetrators of this crime. I'm spiritually connected in an enormous way. I look out every single day, and I think, thank God I was born in Australia. I have a lovely family member. I have some wonderful, wonderful friends who've done the research and have been there to support me through this. And I just wonder what kind of person continues doing this to another person. The torture is overwhelming. I mean, literally, people are just...
You're asking who's the... Who are the psychopaths who press the button?
Exactly. There's so much evil in the world, and when they do speak to me, it's like, I don't believe in... And they use derogatory language all the time. I don't believe in God. I'm here for a short amount of time. We don't care what happens to all of you targeted individuals. It's working for us. And you think, okay, so you're sitting at home being paid perhaps by somebody to continue doing this to people, bouncing off a satellite somewhere. It's
okay.
Yeah. I know.
I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to agree or disagree.
Yeah. So it's we can just recognise there is so much evil in the world, as we know. We don't only have dictatorships, but we have people who are sponsoring this as well continually. So I will keep fighting this. The reason we talk about it.
Right.
It's worth a lot of money too.
Yeah.
It's worth a lot of money. And,
Yeah.
But as Oppenheimer, who kind of was the father of the atomic bomb, was he evil or did he save lives? Or, there's a moral gray area, and a lot of people can't see the bigger picture, and they're trapped. I'm partially trapped by national security oaths and whatnot that I can talk about. And you were asking about two more acronyms. Why don't we go back?
Yes, TAMI
TAMI's
and Satan.
Thought, Amplification, and Mind Interface. And it's a way to probe someone back to their childhood, for example, to make them recall memories. Let's say they're a terrorist. You can make them give out their network of who they meet and that kind of thing. And then Satan, that's the evil part of it. CIA is quite known for assassinating leaders they don't like and people. That stands for Silent Assassination Through Adaptive Networks. Now, that can be neural networks, like what your brain is made of, through dysfunction, or it can be social networks. It includes that, making the person isolated and throwing their voices and making them believe all their family and friends are against them. And so the hypnosis, the remote hypnosis, rehic, works better if a person is isolated than has a good support group. And other networks are, you can imagine, we're all networked in some way. It can be social networks that can break in, spoof you on Facebook or something like that. And it's about destroying the person from every direction they can. And no one's going to believe them. What, the whole government's out to get you? Who are you? Why would they do that? And those are typical questions. They do it because they have to get the data or they want to use you. And it's probably because you are nobody. That's the reason they do that. In any study, they need a sample of all languages, all cultures, all people to make sure the weapon works on everything.
Or you have certain groups that they've gone and used as well. I've found that a lot of gay men have been used for this experimentation. My introduction to James Cameron was overwhelming. One of the most arrogant individuals I've ever met and lived with, but I learned so much from that relationship. And then seeing at iLabs what happened with the experiments. So had I not had that, there are many people out in the world who don't have the support, which is just dreadful. So many people, and some people commit suicide through this, of course. And we're out there. The reason we do this work now is that Robert's an educator, and I'm just one of the victims talking about it. And we will continue doing this as long as we have to make people more aware of the situation. So
any good human can't just sit by and watch people get destroyed.
So we do this because we want to share the information so that you can then go on and share it with people as well. That's what we ask for from today.
And then there'll be more pressure, and the politicians will have to not play dumb anymore, and the newspapers and mass media can't hide it with all this counterintelligence that goes on. I haven't watched television in probably 7 years because I see through it all. And I just don't like the propaganda and the lies they tell the public. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, I think we're just at that point where we could take 20 minutes of questions. So I'm going to ask Sam, if you have a question you'd like to ask, please just put your hand up and we'll get as many questions as we can get done. Yes, Cash.
Hi, Doctor. So I know that you've been involved with creating these chips from what you've been talking about. And I know it's probably a lot harder than what it comes across, but couldn't we come up with a GoFundMe page and find you create something to detect the chip so you can just remove it from somebody rather than trying to expose these people? Because I think these evil people just won't stop.
Okay. A lot of people have tried that. The chips, if they were chips, there are potentially expensive ways you could find them. Your group, I cater? No,
iCouture. Depends where you come from in the world. iCouture. Our friend in Boston, Frank Allen, I'm on his program sometimes, radio program, talking about, and he calls it e-couture. And e-couture, yeah. I cater. And Melanie Britchan, who's the president of iCouture, says, she says e-couture. So I've got, depending on who I talk to, so it stands for ICATOR, International Coalition Against the Torture and Robotization of All Living Beings.
And there are many of these groups that have sprung up all over the world. They try to get funding, they try to identify that someone is chipped, and I'll put a caveat on that, they're giving off radio frequencies at certain points of their body in anechoic chambers, shielded from the outside world. You can't fully shield anything. And I've worked in some, when I was working at the Navy, we used a lot of anechoic chambers. So it's a good idea, but it's a lot more complex than that. And then who do you give the evidence to? Go to your congressman? They'll just shrug their shoulders. Go to a judge? They don't know anything about this.
And in my case, having to, over the years, really teach people, educate people about this on a subject which is so overwhelming that it's like, okay, I can't take this information on. Why do I need to? And again, it's through sharing the information. And, God bless the way we've met over the last 2-3 years on the panel discussions we've had about this subject and sending it out on YouTube and people contacting us. It's just overwhelming. But this is what we need to do, because I'm doing it because of the future of children and grandchildren, future generations. They're going to suffer from this. We already see children walking around on their phones all the time. There's no communication. So that's what we need to do. We need to be able to share this information for future generations to stop this.
So to answer your question, why would a government give out grants to stop their own weapon? We can, but it's very expensive. You can do, for example, a good experiment would be a superconducting liquid nitrogen, high temperature yttrium, barium, copper oxide 3 chamber to do some of the testing in. That's $10 million. Only a government can afford some of these shielding techniques and other things. But eventually, hopefully, Elon Musk will fund some of his wealth and get some good scientists to look into it further.
What's the target? Sorry.
How effective are Farades cages for all the military, like anti-espionage Farades cages?
Anne has come down from Mossman, and Anne is also a targeted. She's a targeted individual also.
There's a standard called Echelon that's basically the allowable electromagnetic frequencies some of the secure labs are allowed to have. They're in Faraday cages. They'll shield certain frequencies, but most, I would look at the stealth bomber, the types of technologies they use to dampen radar frequencies and absorb them. Most people can't afford a good one. They don't know the right thicknesses, what frequencies can be filtered out. And the system, I think I can say this, is it can adjust to any frequency range. It's full spectrum. So, as well as ELF waves, which is extremely low frequencies, the one that submarines use to broadcast to the depths of the ocean. That penetrates almost everything. So they're extremely hard to block, but in terms of testimony of some people who have built them, they say it does dampen. And so far, all the techniques to help people are jammers or dampeners, and that will clear up their head a little bit, and then they can maybe get on with life a little better. But so far, there's no 100% effectiveness that we know of.
What's the criteria for targeting? And what is the end goal?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The end goal.
May I just?
Yeah, please.
So in my situation, I think I provided the targeters an opportunity. They knew they sourced these people very carefully, and I believe that because I was travelling while I was in the United States so much back and forward to Europe. I used to be a director for a luxury cruise line. I happen to be a gay man also, and I know a lot of gay men have been used in this technology, where I'm contacted by so many of them. It goes back to the days of when they used to follow men home who went to bars and picked up by prostitutes, and they tested LSD, and they had 2A mirrors checking the effects of...
It was called Midnight Climax.
Midnight
by the
Climax.
CIA.
Midnight Climax. So in my situation, I provided them an opportunity to test the effects from satellite or wherever it was bounced off, the ionosphere, when I was up in all these different countries or down in the southern area of Earth. And I've just found that my targeting, my torture has escalated the more I talk about it, but I don't have an opportunity to do anything else. I travel as much as I can still. I do these fundraising concerts here, which I love to do, which are just fantastic. And I have to keep my life as simple as I can now, but I won't give up. They will never, I call these people CATs, C-A-T-S, cowards, actors, and traitors. And one day, their 9 lives will run out.
So, Craig, that's your feeling of why you were targeted?
Absolutely.
Historically, the government looks for people who can be discredited. They live alone. They either don't have a voice in society of any sort, and I think it could be they've committed some sort of crime, but of all the people I've interviewed, depending on how honest they were with me, and I'm not sure, it looks more random to me than anything, as if they're testing it on a broad range of people. Now, what I hear is like with Craig here, if you identify with a group, you get convinced they're targeting that group. And I can name every religion in the world, and they believe they're being targeted specifically for their religion, for example. And that's kind of led me to my conclusion. This is a broad swath of all humans on the planet.
Yeah.
And the end goal?
Oh, and the end goal is total control. Total control.
Why?
So we can all live in utopia forever after and not know we're being controlled.
And then it's
to prevent war, nuclear war, biological war. People can't even think of evil.
Yeah.
You get like a little Skinner shock in a box, oh, I shouldn't steal. Okay, well, everyone will act perfectly.
That's evil trying to control evil.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
So for those
It's
of us who have a
hypocrisy.
soul, recognise that we have a soul, that we feel blessed in so many ways, that's very straightforward to me. It's very easy that I'm in touch with my being and something bigger than myself. I have that connection, and I recognise how much evil there is out in the world. We have 20,000 children dying unnecessarily every single day. And I try and give back as much as I can, but I can't now because I'm involved in this program, which has been established and affecting so many people around the world. So, if I may say, with ICATUR, if anybody would like to make a donation, that will help us. We're taking this to Parliament in Brussels very shortly. We have the British physicist, Dr. Barry Trower, who created the mind control platform for
He did electronic warfare, signal intelligence for the British Navy. Very wise man, and he's willing to speak. Maybe he's passed the terms of his agreement.
Yeah, so he's coming over to help us out, to go before Parliament. So if you would like to make a donation today, and I know some of you have, thank you so much for this today, but if you'd like to go onto our website, which is icator.be, there's a bio of all of us who are the board members, and also an opportunity to just share some money, if you can, to help out. We're only doing this for future generations. That's all we're trying to do here. I mean, the fact that we have to really sit down and take our time for future generations, whereas these people who are the perpetrators of this crime also have children and grandchildren who may be affected, is just, it's ironic.
It's a paradox.
Yeah, it's a paradox. Yeah.
Well.
Christopher.
Craig, I'm interested, you have a very high level of verbal fluency. How is it that the torture that you have described and that you are suffering from runs in tandem with that verbal fluency?
That's a question I have too.
That's a great question. I don't know. I can put on the face. I don't put on it. How do I describe it? I try to maintain a balance between what is happening to me. I don't talk about it very often. I wouldn't talk about it as I've met you through the fundraisers. I don't talk about it very much, other than panel discussions and so forth. It's overwhelming. I don't know why they don't kill me. They can easily kill me.
Yeah.
They've taken me to the point of dying many, many times. Many times. On this voyage I just did down from Vancouver to Auckland. Right there. No sleep whatsoever. Every time I tried to take a nap, it would just bounce off.
There is a probability of death because everything's linked to your nervous systems. Hormones can be excreted that will cause vasoconstriction, and you have any sort of hereditary, cardiovascular disease. They can kill you. And the Russians also, from a DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency report, I think it was in the 70s, said the Russians are developing a heart attack weapon by a runaway panic attack. So part of the fear, that's why they call them spooks, could spook you to death, literally.
So why have they taken down Putin, for example? If they can control you and...
Can we just pass the microphone over? That's right.
Sorry,
Speak
they
into
can
it, yeah.
control you.
Sorry, just start the question again, if you could.
Oh,
Thank
why
you.
haven't they taken down
Use these techniques
these techniques to
to
take down
to
these?
silently assassinate Putin.
Yes.
One, the Russians know about it. They have their own, what they call in their counterintelligence, psychic army. And so they may have defenses for Putin. Secondly, they want to keep this on the lowdown. A world leader like Putin said, they're attacking my brain. Well, that blows the lid off of everything. Now we look into the history of everyone else who's been claiming this and think of the repercussions of a government where
But I'm
suddenly...
thinking, for example, through assassination.
Yeah.
Because there are many people that would like to take him down. I'm using him as an example.
There are other
if they have that
techniques.
control,
Yeah.
could they not have him assassinated?
Yes, but usually the indirect assassins, what they'll do is use someone who's a target, not you, you're a kind man, but someone who's a target and confused, they'll put Putin's voice in it. I'm torturing you. Oh, try to kill me if you want. And that's how you program the assassin. They're not paid, but they want their pain and torture stopped. A lot of TIs feel physical pain constantly.
I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Christopher.
Yeah, Craig, there are just two elements to it. Was one presumes that these voices, somebody earlier on said, who's behind the microphone? And one takes it they're computer generated, and somebody's just pressing a button and sending it. And when you think about experiments, normally experiments come with research. Research comes with monitoring. To what aim is there randomly being able to affect you and torture you without identifying the research of what's happening? Are we winning? Have we achieved anything?
Okay, I can answer that. The system works off of stress levels. So think of it as a remote lie detector test. But if you don't care and you're proud of it, it will move on to the next script. the
But
next-
how do they monitor the outcome of their research?
They're reading it in real time.
So they get retransmission.
Yes.
That's the sneaky part.
That's the sneaky part. And when the CIA was doing the LSD experiments and Congress during the church hearings asked them, why are you dosing people with LSD and then not following it up, the long-term effects or anything else? They were following up with the long-term effects, but they can't tell Congress. They don't even have the security clearance. We have an overt government in the United States, the ones that people vote for, and then we have the secret government. And the secret government is becoming more powerful every day.
That's the one where they hand up the puppet, isn't
Yes, the puppet bastards.
So, and to your point, so that's what I do. I keep going and I say, yes, I know you can kill me. Go ahead and do it. Because the wrath of my God is going to come down on you. That's what it's about. If you want to go ahead and kill me, I know you can do that easily to any of the targeted victims. So I just maintain this balance all the time. And it's like your book, The Soul Catcher, you know, they can't get into my soul. I've gone and said to numerous people, they've scarred my soul, but they will never get my soul.
There's, yeah, and it's why he's continuously targeted by this automated system, is there's a brain signature that we look for of someone who's broken. We broke that horse, we broke that human. And we won, now we can reprogram or do whatever we want.
You've done a lot of work with CIA, and you have a lot of information about all this stuff. How come they haven't assassinated you?
Yeah, I knew that question would come up. I was warned by a guy from Israeli Secret Service or Mossad not to come to your country because if I left the United States, I'd be assassinated. I don't fear death. I'm doing the right thing. This is a great purpose for my life. It's to save others' lives. And I get probably an email a day, a thank you note for saving someone's life by the information that I give out. I just can't live my life in fear. I'm going to do what I do. Could they kill me? Yes, of course. I don't hide. But I also have become too much of a figure that would probably lead to a lot of questions.
Are you limited, Robert, with what you can say?
To some extent. I can tell you how we create UFOs, for example, with directed energy weapons, the orbs in the sky. But I can't talk about certain signal intelligence, advanced sensors and systems in detail.
As Craig knows, I tend to be an optimist and probably a naive utopian. And I do love science fiction and read a lot of anti-utopian literature when I was in high school. But usually through a war, there's an application that's developed to maintain a peace or to prevent an attack. And usually you can kind of see like technological or medical advances during the time of a war that then have a civilian application afterwards. And when you're talking about like ILAD, if I'm pronounced it correctly, like, you know, my 98-and-a-half-year-old grandmother died about a year ago, and I kind of always just think, wouldn't it be great if you could download her brain and her life and her experience into the cloud or into a thumb drive, and you could still...
Microsoft
so kind of like, and then, you know, her parents and her parents, so you wouldn't be mucking around with genealogy.com, or you could actually still hear the stories in that way, you know.
It works different.
And then there was some part of the conversation earlier where we were talking about, you know, copying a copy of a copy, and then we were watching the TV version of Isaac Asimov's Foundation, where Cleon keeps getting copied, but each copy is, you know, like a bad copy on a copy machine that drifts slightly, you know. So, yeah, would there be positive applications?
Yes.
Wait, even saying, okay, you know, it says the voice of God, this is Allah, lay down your weapons. You could say during the pandemic, keep calm, don't worry about it so much, and that sort of thing.
So what if everybody had their had their own personal Jesus in their head that said very positive things, but not distracting, would guide you. You're lost, and you can connect wirelessly to the internet anywhere. Oh, you want to make a left here if you want to get there. So like a personal assistant. And then you mentioned grandparents, dead relatives. Microsoft, some other companies are already doing that, not downloading the brain. What they're doing is using Markov modeling of speech, of how, and with the voice morphing, of how they sound and the phrases they use, and it gives you a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling they're still around.
Do we have time for one more question?
Do they have any statistics on the number of people who have been affected by this in Australia or around the world?
Yeah, it's a slow process in Australia. It really is. They're hearing about this, they go to their families and talk about it. The family sometimes doesn't want to know about it. Members of my family don't want to know about it, and I've got a doctor in my family, just don't want to know about it. So all I can suggest is that if there are any people who you know very, very close to you who do say something about this and you know that they lead normal lives, please open up the discussion and really understand that the medical practice at this stage does not recognise what I'm going through, what others are going through. So I've got two friends over in Western Australia. I've got Anne's a new contact for me. I've got a chap in Newcastle. So it's slowly happening, and yeah.
So if you did go to a doctor, some of them would just say, well,
oh yeah,
hearing seems to be
what happens is they say to me, oh look, you know, and Mars is not real, or the Earth is flat. I've had to sit through that. I've gone to the point of trying to establish a foundation so that the medical practice would understand. And all I've been told is that, well, once the medical board in New South Wales recognises this as really happening to people, and that we're not delusional or crazy, will we then investigate? It's a frustrating situation to sit down in front of doctors and have to go through that just to get recognition in some way without being put down, or to get a referral to go and have an MRI, CAT scan, or an X-ray. And the radiologist is typically looking for some type of tumour, nothing else, as I talked about before.
I worked as a nurse for 30 years in the emergency department.
Can you take the microphone, Anne?
I worked as a nurse in the emergency department for about 30 years, and we used to get several people coming in and saying, the government's, attacking me and torturing me. And before I was a target, I'd just look at them and go, are you on antipsychotic medication? When I became one of the TIs or one of the people that I completely...
Yeah, your viewpoint, the walls of your reality came crashing down.
Right, it's so difficult to explain to any normal person, because they can't imagine that the government would be abusing innocent, regular human beings.
They even put it in the medical literature. If someone says the government's doing this to them, you have to classify them as, so-and-so.
So,
all right. Well,
thank you, everybody, for being here today. Thank you for listening to this interesting discussion, and to my dear mate for spending the time to bring updates on what's going on. And please, all I ask is to all of you and to anybody around the world who is sharing this today, please talk to your friends, your family, about what's going on and how real it is. We need to stop this. Future generations are going to suffer otherwise. And so we will keep fighting and doing our best. And as I mentioned, if you'd like to help us out with iCouture, that would be absolutely wonderful. So thank you, my dear friend.
No,
thank you so much.